Hey, good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Morning Musings, our special Friday edition of Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. We're going to make this our very last session in our response, review, and refutation of Joel Richardson's book, Mystery Babylon, Unlocking the Bible's Greatest Prophetic Mystery. We have spent some 17 videos now exposing Mr. Richardson's hermeneutic, basically. Pardon me. It is so unfortunate that someone can gain such popularity, sell so many books, based upon an absolutely false hermeneutic. Number one, he ignores the fact that the book begins with a declaration that the time for fulfillment was at hand. The Father, who knew the day and the hour of the coming of the Lord, revealed to his servants, these things must shortly come to pass, the time. And the word time is kairos, the appointed time. The time is at hand. Now, Mr. Richardson wants us to believe that what that means is that John is projected to the time of the end when, i.e. in the time of the end, when fulfillment will be at hand. Well, John is projected to the time of the end, to be sure, in John chapter 4. He was taken in the Spirit. But Revelation chapter 1 is absolutely the precursor to this, telling us that everything that was going to be seen was at hand and about to come to pass. Number two, Mr. Richardson is guilty of anachronistic hermeneutic. He takes things, for instance, from the Old Testament that spoke about specific countries, specific kingdoms that existed at that time, in which the Bible writer was predicting their destruction coming soon. And he says, well, in the day of the Lord, which Mr. Richardson posits as still future, that kingdom, which was called by whatever name at that particular time, it might have been Edom, it might have been Tyre, it might have been Sidon, it might have been Assyria, it might have been Babylon. And says, well, you know, the nation that was this and this and this back then, it's now under the Islamic rule. So it's talking about Islam. Folks, that is a horrible, unjustified hermeneutic. We could go on, but I've already shared these thoughts with you. I want to conclude this series by calling your attention to the fact that Revelation chapter 11 definitively, positively, and irrefutably identifies the great city Babylon. Revelation chapter 11 tells us that the bodies of the two witnesses would lie in the street, which spiritually, that's symbolically, is called Sodom and Egypt. And then inspiration gives us the interpretation of that symbolic reference to Sodom and Egypt by saying it is also where the Lord was crucified. Let me make a couple of very quick points here. In Deuteronomy chapter 32, 29 to 32, a prophecy of Israel's last days. Twice in that great chapter, we are told that it was about Israel's last days, her last time, her latter end. And we are told that in Israel's last days, she would become the vine of Sodom. Furthermore, in Isaiah chapter 1, Yahweh spoke through the prophet, and he said, speak to the leaders of Jerusalem. Speak to Sodom. He was calling Jerusalem Sodom. Likewise, in Ezekiel 16 and Ezekiel chapter 23, both chapters of which are drawn from in the book of Revelation. Guess what? Jerusalem is referred to as Sodom. Spiritually, symbolically. So when Revelation, which draws upon Ezekiel extensively, tells us that this city, Babylon, is spiritually called Sodom, and it's about the last days, and everything else in the book of Revelation has to do with Israel and her covenant, that's pretty strong evidence. Furthermore, she is spiritually called Egypt. Why? Because of the concept of bondage. Throughout the entirety of the New Testament, especially in the Pauline literature, Jerusalem and the Old Covenant is referred to as bondage. Galatians chapter 4 speaks of the bondage of Old Covenant Israel. She is in bondage to her children. She who? Hagar. Who is Hagar? Well, according to Genesis chapter 25, Hagar was the Egyptian. We thus have, biblically, Jerusalem identified symbolically, spiritually, as Sodom and Egypt. Oh, but wait. Then there's that interpretive statement. It is also where? Now notice it doesn't say, it doesn't say by whom. It is a geographical reference. It is also where our Lord was crucified. Now let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. You know this. Jesus was not crucified in Mecca. He was not crucified in Rome. He wasn't crucified in New York City. There is only one place exclusively, where Jesus was crucified. Pardon me, had a really bad allergy attack last night. Thus, when Revelation identifies the great city Babylon, as Sodom, as Egypt, and then interprets that as being the place where the Lord was crucified, it does not matter the verbal gymnastics, the anachronistic hermeneutic that Mr. Richardson employs. You cannot turn Revelation chapter 11, verse 8, into a reference, into a description of any other city, unless you can prove that Jesus was crucified somewhere other than Old Covenant Jerusalem in the first century. Whoever you identify as Babylon other than Jerusalem is a false identification. That is why Mr. Joel Richardson's view that Babylon of Revelation was Mecca in Saudi Arabia is absolutely false. And if you want a further in-depth discussion of this, let me recommend you get a copy of my book, Who is This Babylon? Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and order this book. Send me a note saying you saw the offer on YouTube or Facebook, and I'll pay for your shipping. Well, thanks so very much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. In a couple of weeks, I'm going to begin an examination and refutation. I'm going to be debunking Dr. Brock Hollett's book, Debunking Preterism. Brock Hollett, man that I've met, has written this in an attempt to disprove the truth of covenant eschatology. But I have to tell you, if it was possible to have a book worse than Mystery Babylon, this is it. So be watching as we begin in a couple of weeks in our debunking of Debunking Preterism. Thanks for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. You have a safe weekend. Lord willing, see you on Monday.